Sorry, but I'm just about to have a wee visitor here.
Oh,
Hi.
hey, camera
It's
hold.
me. Yeah, look
No,
you.
we're totally inclusive. Cats included.
We're so inclusive.
We're so inclusive. Furry people, furry animals, all good.
Um,
I'm not editing that
I
part out.
find.
Thank you so much, Joss, for joining us. And could you introduce yourselves to the Room B crowd? And can you start by telling us about your background and experience as a speech language therapist, particularly in complex needs?
Sure. Hi, Suzanne. Nice to see you again. So, I'm a speech and language therapist, and I originally qualified in La Trobe Uni in Melbourne with my master's in speech pathology. First job was in a special school, was actually called an SDS in Australia, which is Special Developmental School. We had a whole range of kids with a whole range of different learning needs of all ages. After that, I went into community health, which is our preschoolers in Melbourne,
Oh, yeah.
and that's in that role, it was our job to identify those kids that were going to be or were already red flags for future learning difficulties. Then, when I came back to New Zealand, I worked for a few years for TalkLink Trust in Auckland, and that obviously is with people with complex communication needs. So we dealt a little bit with teaching staff and what the needs were within the classroom, but primarily it was whole of life
Mm.
communication and how could these kids express their wants and needs with anyone. And then for the last 10 years, probably, I've been in schools working with students of all ages from primary school to college with communication difficulties.
That's where we collided, I think.
That is where we collided in a primary school working together.
Yeah.
Um, and then alongside that, doing my private practice,
Mm.
which sees children with developmental and other communication difficulties. So that covers all areas of play, social, listening, attention, language, speech, and literacy.
That's huge. It's absolutely huge. What motivated you to specialize in working with learners who have complex communication needs?
I think it was basically from having that interest in the alternative and augmentative communication
AAC,
side of
yeah.
things through TalkLink, um, and then putting those skills into a classroom. So my first job at that SDS school was fully integrated within the classroom. So we were not actually allowed to remove children to do therapy with them individually outside the classroom. So
Oh,
um, I think I really loved that first year because it was just absolutely one-on-one in the classroom with the teachers and working with the teachers really close and their teacher aides who were all amazing. Um, and working with the students as a whole class rather than that
oh, it's
withdrawal method.
fantastic. Yeah. So
Mm.
that's the dream for a lot of us, isn't it? To just try and get it all working within that rather than that pull out approach. And that so
Yeah.
considering that, when you're seeing the complex needs impacting a student's communication skills, would you prefer, like in a practical sense, in a therapy sense, do you feel it's more effective to have that sort of environment rather than a pull out one with where you probably don't get the generalizing happening as much? What do you think?
Mm. I think there's a place for both. I do think there's a learning side of it where it's really beneficial to have the child or student one-on-one to teach them some specific skills. But if we're thinking of our outcome, which is always going to be a functional outcome, then we actually want them practicing that skill in a classroom in their typical environment as soon as possible. So it would be, like a coach is, if you're playing tennis, a coach is going to be out there targeting your forehand, but then you're not going to get the opportunity in a game just to do forehands. So you need to actually then integrate it into the whole
Yeah,
picture. So I think there's still a place for that, but not so much a pull out method, but just an opportunity to teach them a specific skill
right.
and then integrate that back into the classroom setting. Being in the classroom is so beneficial for both me and the teacher I'm working with because we just learn so much from each other. So we learn
Yeah.
I see how the teacher manages a classroom, how they support the child with learning difficulties in a classroom. They pick up tips from me about cues I might give the students. So there's lots of, whether it's signing or visual or a prompt, whatever it is, then the teacher's picking that up naturally rather than me telling them this is what you should do and then expecting them just to go and do it. If it's integrated, then you pick it up much more naturally. And
Okay.
it's like you and I have always had. We've always been able to sit down and go, I tried this the other day. That didn't work.
It always
Even when
worked,
you're in the
Joss.
classroom.
It always worked.
Oh, yeah, sorry. No, it always works because we're working with children. So,
What are some early signs or red flags that teachers who or teacher aides can look for in the classroom if they haven't got specialist assistants?
I think it's that engagement,
Engage.
so part of it is looking at observing the student and seeing what they're doing in different times during the day. I do spend time with the college kids I'm working with at the moment, just observing them in their group sessions because you pick up a lot about who's engaged and who's just not understanding what's happening around them.
Mm.
And it's little things like, do they respond to the questions that the
Yeah.
teacher's asking, or do they, I've got one girl I'm thinking of who's watching everyone else and waiting for their response, and then she'll just be like, yep. And if you I think she's a very good example of one that is masking and
Oh,
is,
yeah.
yeah, and is actually doing it quite effectively for a lot of the case. But she's in a class where the teachers and the support team are actually watching and picking that up. So,
The other flip side of that is sometimes if you're not responding, it doesn't mean you're not understanding. You've just got some factors there that need support. So, how can teachers maybe modify their language? What sort of things so that they can be more accessible for students if they've had those little noticings and they're
mm,
thinking, I'm pretty sure that child understands me or that child does not understand me.
mm.
What kinds of practical things can they do?
Yeah, well, you can come in with me on this one too, Suzanne.
Okay.
So things like, I mean, one of the first things is, as a speech language therapist, we're always saying to people, reduce your language.
Reduce.
Make your language that you use with the students to the point.
Mm.
Take away all the fluffiness. Kiwis are very good. We're perceived to be very polite people because we talk so much around the answer. Because we don't just say to someone, turn the light on. We'll say something like, oh, it's getting a bit dark. I just wonder if you could turn the light on. As part of being polite, it's a social form. But when it comes to teaching your classroom, it's not helpful for those kids that aren't understanding language. They will respond much better to direct statements that have all that fluffiness taken out of it. So, really thinking about how are you explaining things? How many steps are you using in each explanation? Can you reduce it? Can you provide it in a visual format as you talk it through so the students have something to refer back to? So, one of the things about visuals is they stay there, so you can refer back to them.
Right.
The problem with the auditory, the verbal instructions, they're gone in a flash. And if you've missed it, you've missed it. And many of our students will be too self-conscious or embarrassed to actually ask for clarification. So they will just do what they remember, which might be the first thing they heard, the last thing they heard, or none of the above. Checking in with them is great, but giving them a bit of independence where you've got the stuff visually represented in a way that's appropriate for the student, which means it could be photos, visuals, signs, written, that sort of thing, means that they can be more independent and check in themselves to see what they've got and what they're missing. And I mean, that goes with too having that relationship with the students that they know they can come and ask questions, that they're comfortable enough to do that they've got ways and they're taught ways to make notes if they're old enough for that sort of thing, because these kids are going to be in the workplace soon and some of them are getting workplace experience already. How are they going to make notes about what their tasks are during the day? Because they're not necessarily going to be able to have a chance to repeatedly do it, they might need something to refer back to.
That helps with employment skills as well, and coping by themselves in the outside world. And
Yeah.
a lot of what our teachers find as well is if they have this visual timetable, I think a lot of times people feel locked in.
Mm.
But I've found one of the solutions to that is to have that kind of, for bucket, you've got the whiteboard.
Yes.
Sometimes that black and white, just put something visual on the board, and it's actually illustrating exactly what you're saying, and it can make a huge difference. So do you have other specific strategies for supporting students with expressive and receptive language?
That is a huge area.
I know, sorry. Just now, tell us everything.
Everything now. Okay.
No, just if you had to grab something.
Okay, there's so much involved in a child's receptive language skills.
So you basically have to know a child first, wouldn't you, really? You just get into that. Yeah.
Yeah. Need to know the child first and know where their understanding is. And also just think about the fact that what children are saying, their expressive language, their understanding will be slightly better than what they're saying.
Yes.
So that means that if you've got a student who's saying 4-word sentences, so they're only at the stage where they might be telling you something about the ball is there, or the ball up, meaning it's up on the roof. So they're only giving you, those few words. Then what you should be saying to them should be matching that slightly above that level. Right. So that means that you don't want to give them a sentence that's got lots of information and key words in it, because they will only remember 2 or 3 items. We're trying to match our language to what they're doing and push them one step further.
It's the zone of proximal development, is it not? It's just that one step to go, I'm stretching you that little bit. But yeah, definitely have to get to know you first.
Quite good just to think about the key words that you're saying in your sentence. Yes. So this is where things like using visuals and signs like Marketon, keyword signing, are really good, because they force you to think about what are the key words in my sentence. So if you're saying to the students, okay, so it's raining outside, so lunch break's going to be inside today. So, you need to get your lunch boxes, but come back to the class because we'll stay in here for playtime, blah, blah, blah. What's the key word? What's the key message there? And there's a lot of instructions in that sentence, and there's a lot of, why this is happening and what to do about it. So break it down and really think about how you would express that to someone else. And so if you did have to use visuals for it, or you did have to use a few signs, what would they be?
Right.
And so for receptive language, it's always about breaking things down for them into chunks so that they can understand more key bits of information at a time. Yes. And also, because I'm a speech language therapist, I love my visuals, and because my background's in AAC, I'm all about the visuals. And now that I've done a lot more with Marketon keyword signing, then that as well is really supportive. You're helping them understand the message because you're giving them a visual as well as just your verbal. And it's forcing us to slow down what we say and reduce what we say.
I think a lot of people think if we're reducing what we're saying, we're not teaching that really enriched vocab. But that one other added thing can be an adjective, an enriched word. What do you think about that?
Again, that's getting to know your students. So how are they simplifying their language? A lot of the kids I work with, and a lot of adults with language difficulties, will reduce their output because they don't have the syntax, the sentence structure, or they don't have the vocabulary, or whatever the reason might be. So it comes back, which we always talk about a lot. What is your end goal? Like, what is the purpose of this? Am I giving them an instruction to teach them about basic concepts in or under, or am I giving them an instruction we want them to follow? So it's coming back to what's the purpose of your communication? That there's a time and a place to do the teaching, and then to do the testing, and to do the supporting.
Very much. And that brings me right back, and this happens a lot in my job as well. When you're looking at the function of it, it's like, are you informing or are you asking for compliance? And that's huge. I know we've had huge conversations about that. about
Yeah.
how when the AAC is introduced, are they just requesting or are they making a comment as well? Are you extending
Mm.
their communicative capabilities? For people who are not quite sure about AAC, is alternative augmentative communication. So it's anything that is not actually relying on speech to convey a message.
All the research shows that it supports speech and language.
Yes.
So so there's lots of ideas out there about what AAC does,
Yes.
and a lot of the questions we get from families and concerns, significant concerns, are that, will my child use AAC and not start to talk? So what I explain to my parents that I work with is that as humans, we're very lazy people, and we will never use something that takes more effort. So we will never use a communication board instead of speech, because
Right.
speech will always be our easiest, quickest option. And the reason for that is because we say it's unaided, which means we don't need additional stuff like
Yeah.
a communication board. That's an aided communication system because you need something with you. Signing is non-aided because it's just our hands.
Yep.
We use it as a bridge from a child who's not communicating as effectively and efficiently as they could be to being able to do so. So I
Mm.
think AAC has a huge place to play because we know that it actually helps develop a child's communication skills. I've seen so many kids who we put AAC in place and they'll start using it really effectively, and then they'll just, then other stuff starts happening as well. There's a lot of factors that go into that, but there have been some amazing outcomes.
Yes, absolutely. There have been for literacy, like the alternative pencils, all that sort of
Yep.
stuff. Yeah, I found really huge gains with that. And like you say, it is a bridge. I notice that progression starts to happen. So
Mm.
I think you'd be an advocate with me as well, early and often with the literacy and meaningful, and it has to be comprehensive as well, and it has to be all every day, all the time, just like everybody else, to develop literacy skills and communication skills.
Yep. And we know now that literacy skills, a person who is literate actually has a part of the brain that is active, whereas
Yep.
people who are illiterate don't have that part of the brain active.
Mm,
So we know that we are modifying the brain, which means that it takes a structured and explicit teaching to
absolutely.
achieve that. In my practice, we talk about the language pyramid, and that is the base is your attention and listening skills, and then your social skills, and then your language, and then above language is your speech, and then
Mm,
after that, literacy. So we know that kids need to have a certain amount of those lower level platforms before they can actually start focusing on literacy. So language skills and all their play and social skills and attention and listening are all really important as well to support literacy.
I can hear my fellow RTDs from when I was a resource teacher of the deaf, that pyramid was totally, so do not expect this top tier stuff until you've got those language foundations in there. So if
Mhm.
somebody doesn't want to go down a rabbit hole and basically become a proxy SLT, I found, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I found sometimes if you just type in the key skill that you're looking for and say progression or milestones or what have you, and it can give you an idea of the direction you should go in. Again, not everybody's got an access to a JOS like me. So to check that what I was doing is not completely damaging.
Yeah, like I said before, language is such a huge,
It is
complex,
massive. Yeah.
yeah, that, even just your basic concepts, that's a massive table of development. But again, by the time a child's 5, they pretty much should have all their basic concepts, and that's their numeracy concepts and size concepts. So that's in on under is the first few, and then it's also things like below and above and bigger than, less than,
Yeah.
and all their WH
So
questions,
the
what
stuff that
and
would
why.
be occurring in a classroom anyway. So just
Yeah.
basically explicitly teach those things.
Just coming back to your red flags, we're thinking about, your typical 5-year-old, when you ask them some of those WH questions, they're responding a bit randomly. I've got one at the moment, and you say to her, "Where do you brush your teeth?" And she'll be like, "Toothpaste."
Yes.
I think, aha, right. We don't really get where. There's lots of, um, just having a social interaction with someone. Can they take turns, watching how they play? Do they play with their peers or are they off on their own
Mm,
watching? Are they able to sit and listen for a few minutes? Certainly in circle time, a lot of the kids I work with, it's really obvious in circle time because they're not interested in what's happening because the language is probably.
yeah, we've got to have the expectation as well that that can improve.
Yes.
It's not just like, oh, poor Johnny, he just cannot get that. I think we do have to have the mindset of
Yeah.
rather. I think that's why I go for the skill. It's just like, okay, he's not listening. Is it engagement? Is it this? Is it that?
Mm,
Therefore, what are the stages of this? He seems to be here. It's kind of like a rough guide to now I'm going to do
absolutely.
this to help
Yeah.
him along the stages.
Majority of the work that I do now, whether it's with the college students or the preschoolers, any age group, it's talking to the families and the teaching staff about this is where they're at and these are the next skills that we need to build. So rather than going, oh, they're performing at the age of a 5-year-old, that's not actually helpful to anyone. It's
Right.
like we've got these skills and this is the next level. So if they're understanding 4 or 5 word little sentences with maybe 2 or 3 key words in them, then you can start putting either a next, the next stage on from that, adding on more information or getting them to express that kind of level of information as well. So if they're doing it, they understand it, then maybe it's time to start making sure they're doing it in their written work or their oral work or whatever it is. And looking at seeing, is what they're saying and understanding matching up or close to each other. Really love using narratives for some of the older students because you really get to see, can they structure it? What happens in the beginning, the middle, the end? Most of the students I work with don't even know what an end is or last.
Yeah.
So they're missing some of these key things. If you say to them, oh, well, what is going to happen next? They don't have that inferencing ability.
Theory of mind is quite big too, isn't it? Like
It is,
considering,
yeah.
especially with our autistic learners, well, they think it's a thing for autistic learners, but some autistic people might argue theory of mind, being able to consider the other person's point of view, especially in reading and writing, is quite big. What are you
It does.
mostly finding yourself going back to having to do a lot?
I think at the moment, talking to teams who work with these students across the different ages, the biggest thing at the moment is their interoception and their self regulation of their emotions
Yeah.
and understanding their body and how it's reacting to different feelings. They can't learn if they're in a state of fight or flight. We're actually stepping a lot out of our we're not stepping out of our roles so much, but really focusing on those early skills that when we went through our degrees weren't necessarily, they were part of it, but not a huge part of it. So,
Pick a lane, Joss.
yeah, I know, exactly. Well, it's going back to because I did a psychology degree before I did speech therapy. So it's
It
going
helps.
way back. We're now, because we know so much more about people and how they feel after years of schooling, the way we used to work with people and how traumatizing it was. So now we've done this lovely big backstep and gone, wow, let's treat these people, these students with respect and really make the effort to find out how they're feeling and are they ready to learn or do we need to take a step back and actually work on some other things today, which is still hugely beneficial, but is still developing. It's such a
Yeah.
big area and
Well,
still.
trauma informed practice has been big lately, and just kind of just finding out more and more how interconnected everything is and how
Yes.
holistic we need to be to have successful learners. Oh, I've got a list of questions, and I think you've answered all of them. No, we're finished. No. What does a typical intervention session with a student look like for you? And can teachers integrate that kind of thinking into their planning?
Yeah, putting in place those things that will actually help them understand and learn
Mm,
as a whole. I'm seeing a lot more therapists now really focus on the whole classroom and saying,
yes.
here's what you can do for everyone in your
If
class, not
the
just for the one I see.
tide that raises all boats. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's yeah, we find that a lot with autism, isn't it? If it's good for somebody who's autistic, it's good for everybody. And
Yeah. Again, it comes back to what's your goal in that class? Is it to, often you're just trying to give them the instructions for a task or an assignment. So, you
yes,
know, why make it complex? Why not make it nice and simple so everyone gets it? And then your students will do your assignment at the different levels, but at least everyone's got their basics and what they need to do.
so yeah, you've
So,
very much highlighted the universal design for learning concept there of basically having the same learning outcome, but coming at it in their different ways. It's still the same learning. It's just
yeah,
that learning is tailored to that person. It doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be that you
no,
rush out and get 50 million different resources. And the visuals can be simple and they can be, yeah, in the moment and
mm.
reactive to what somebody's just done. The most important piece of advice you'd like to give educators who want to better support their students?
I was thinking about that before, and I think it's,
It's like, we're never going to see you again, Joss. What have you got to say?
do you know what? I think that relationship
Totally. Yeah.
is would have to be one of the key things because without the relationship, it's very difficult to work with someone and to
Mm.
teach them anything or learn anything from them. So that's a huge thing. And if you've got that relationship, then you are seeing the student. There's been a huge number of students that, I initially meet and think, oh boy. Whew. And then, after a few weeks, it's like, we've slipped into a routine. I've got to know them. They've got to know me. And it's like, oh, this is really easy now. I can't believe I thought it was going to be so hard. It's taking which I appreciate in a classroom is difficult, but it is trying to get that relationship.
I was reading the other day, and basically somebody just said the warmth of the environment. I thought we don't actually address that a lot. We talk about
Yeah.
curriculum, we talk about assessments, we talk about this and that, but that is actually, as humans, that is massive for us to have that warmth of environment.
A lot of the schools are aiming for this like British or American level of excellence, and
The
they're
academic progress is the focus. Yeah.
yeah, and they are forgetting that learners learn. First of all, learners learn in different ways,
They
but
do.
also we learn best when we're in a nurtured, calm, safe environment.
Totally. Yeah.
And yeah, it would be lovely to see our schools being more nurturing and caring and not so pressured um, to tick the boxes.
The pressure that teachers feel to get that assessment done, to get that progress shown, to show that achievement has happened, especially
Mm,
in some schools it's more a focus than others, but we're all focusing on it. I keep saying it to everybody, they're probably sick of it. Ipsative assessment, that child, you're measuring them against themselves, and as long as you can show the progress, then you should be able to satisfy somebody else that that progress has been made. We need to be not so hard on ourselves to try and meet this
mm,
objective, that objective. If you take that time to make that nurturing environment and you are actually relaxed enough to make relationships,
mm.
it pays off in dividends 50 billion times over. It's worth investing your time in.
But then it's just that big question of how do you do that in a classroom with how many children? The pressures on teachers now compared to 20 years ago or 30 years ago is a huge difference.
Yeah.
The curriculum and the extra stuff that you need to push into your day every day is quite significant. So from our point of view, we're very aware that having a speech therapist come into your classroom and go, oh, so this child and this child need extra support
Yes.
is enough for some teachers to
Just, okay, I'm
blow their
out.
top
I'm out.
or to run and hide when they see us coming.
But yeah, I've had that happen. But I think that's because there isn't that culture of UDLs or thinking it doesn't work or
Mm,
not having it supported in the school or not actually knowing how to use that effectively. I mean, we all can learn how to do that more effectively and have people buzzing away in different areas or in different
mm,
activities at the same time and have it just be humming
yeah.
chaos, but just productive.
Yeah,
and engaging. So yeah, I think that's the goal we want to get to, really, isn't it?
it
That's where
is.
we want to go. Anyway, we've gone right off speech language therapy and right into education as a whole. So I've got some questions from our questions
Cool.
from the audience. Here's one on AAC. This will be interesting. This is from Lisa. I'd love advice on communication in the classroom for a student who has no expressive or receptive language and hasn't taken to any visuals. I've tried adapted core boards, PECs, visual timetables, and social stories. We're struggling to find a means of communication that everyone can use. That's always a problem, isn't it? So many TAs over the
Isn't it?
weeks, it's not easy to ensure consistency. Ooh,
Mm.
that's full on, isn't
Ooh.
it? There's a lot going on there. I was wondering because it's when you say no expressive or no receptive, not calling you out, Lisa, but there's usually something we can build on. Would you agree?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I think one of the good things we put in place when we worked together was that communication matrix, which is an online um, communication tool to use, which is available to everyone. And when I met with a student that is like this, that, you know, the teachers are saying to me or the parents are saying to me, they don't understand or say anything and there's nothing. That communication matrix tool is really good because it is all the skills before verbal language. So it's what are the communication behaviors that the student is doing that but it's not verbal. Split into 4 categories, which off the top of my head here, we've got requesting or obtaining. The next one is rejecting,
Rejecting.
social skills, and then the last section, which I think is has disappeared. But we'll put a link. We'll provide links and stuff for all this, won't we, Suzanne?
We will do that.
We will. So the
The
communication
communication
matrix,
matrix is free, is it? Is it?
it is free, yeah.
That's
But
free.
they have started charging a little bit for using some of the forms and stuff. But this is a tool I got from an American colleague who'd used it extensively. And I then used it throughout the school. So I use this for any child or student that I know that is not at the verbal level. So it's been fantastic for a huge range of kids that I work with because you can really show that actually they do have communication. So it starts with those pre-intentional communication behaviors. So what are the behaviors the child's expressing? How do they reject something? So if you were to give him, I mean, for me, for example, would be peas. You give it, you know, him pea or her peas. How does she reject those or he? Turn the head, clamp mouth shut, any little vocalization, anything like that. So they get a score, they get a mark for any behavior that they're doing in response to something. So that's, you know, how do they reject? How do they, maybe when you come into when you first see him, you know, maybe you do a little bit of a, you know, I clap my hands and he kind of looks at me and laughs. So that's a behavior. He's understood. And he, you know, maybe next time he's waited for me to do it, or he's always started to respond. So how do they respond to that? How do they then ask you to do it again? Do they kind of lift their hands? Do they lean towards you? Do they laugh again? You know, it's like any of those little behaviors. So certainly when in speech language therapy, where part of our training is to look at all behavior is communication. And I've got that on a lot of my bags. All behavior is communication. So if I walk into a room and a child looks at me, that's a behavior. We don't always know what the behavior means, but it's still a communication behavior. So you've got those pre-intentional behaviors, which is what a baby does. You know, they let you know when they're hungry, they let you know when they're happy. Then you've got the intentional behaviors, which is that one of clamping my mouth shut when you approach me with peas. And then it goes on from there. So there's abstract communication, concrete communication, all leads up to language. So I think same as what you said, Suzanne, that would be my first step.
So what I'm hearing is that child is not yet ready for those forms of communication that they're trialing. They're not there yet. So I was thinking when you were talking about with the pre-intentional behavior, intensive interaction and experience sharing might be a good form of interaction for that child to start off with. They do something, you copy it. So they're learning those communicative rules of
Yep.
back and forth. Yeah.
So depending on the age, we our focus with kids similar to that is that we would go right back to those low levels of that pyramid. We would be focusing on attention and listening, play, and social. So we would be introducing some really fun little high interest toys that might get their attention. We'd be introducing interactive games with
I
them.
was
So,
thinking pop-up
preschooler.
pirates, pop-up pirates,
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yep. Anything like that. We've got, the like balloons or
Oh, yeah.
bubbles. Like I said, depending on the age, but also things like just a box with the fidget toys or activities that might spin with color. So the other thing is,
Attention autism.
yeah, attention autism. Bring out your bucket.
Bring out your bucket. This now, I'm pretty sure this is a point one outreach teacher. So we always run the risk of being way more interesting than anybody else in the room. So you've got to kind of balance that. Maybe take a little social group out. If we think we're going to be too disruptive, that could be the way of doing it. I know that, sometimes when I arrive, they're like, oh, see everybody. And it's not.
Yeah, I have kids trying to climb into my bag, trying to see what tools I've brought with me.
Yeah, it's a hard call for the teachers to be engaging and fabulous 24/7. And then we arrive and they're like, oh, thanks very much.
And I think also on that note too, Suzanne, is I think too we're competing now, all of us are competing with online and games and overstimulation on a regular basis. So it is very hard to be super stimulating for our students when we're nowhere near as exciting as half the games on that they're probably going home and playing.
Yes, and sometimes I feel, but when we have built up that relationship, it's surprising what very low key things they actually find comfort in, and they're just kind of soothed by that. Well, I think that answers Lisa's question. Okay, there's a bit here. I am particularly interested in how teachers can develop language in the classroom, particularly for those students with developmental language disorder. Not every child has access to SLT therapy. Yep. And the teacher really needs to make deliberate acts of teaching so the content of each lesson reaches these students and is understood. I think you've answered your own question there, but that's a big one.
So I guess for me, when we're working with our students with DLD in our lovely little quiet clinical room, it's all about scaffolding. The way we know that it's likely a disorder is that maybe their receptive is a lot worse than their expressive, maybe, which is, counter. Now, children with developmental language disorder will be very patchy, and it won't be a steady decline as they get further through the test. It'll be like a, really bouncy ride for different sections. Often in our assessment tool that we use, which teachers can be trained to use as well, called the Welcome, it gives you a beautiful, like we were saying before, rather than looking at the age, it's looking at what's the skill that these students need to learn next. But it tells you which gaps they've got in language and where to really target their skills. So that means that in a classroom, you could then create a little group that have similar difficulties, and those are the skills you target. We might we'll have something on the board, so this week we're just targeting the WH questions. So can we throw in a little activity in our literacy group where we're doing a scavenger hunt or, something like that. And the kids have to, one half set up the questions, the other half answer, what's a really good activity that the kids can all do that is targeting different levels of the WH questions to meet everyone's needs, like you were saying before. Later years, again, you would be using their written work and having a look at their written work and seeing what they're missing, what gaps they're missing in their written work, and then giving them that as a special task to kind of focus on. It is about developing that flow on. If this happens, then what's going to happen next? So we do lots and lots of narratives where I just give them a picture of something and they have to write, at least so much about what's happening next. This is what happened in this picture, and they have to tell me what happened next, and they have to use, coordinating conjunctions, or they have to use this and that and whatever it might be. So
I'm saying in a practical sense, you've got the skill that you're zeroing in on, and then I would just put that skill in the middle and then brainstorm across all the curriculum areas or all the opportunities throughout the day. I can do this, this,
yeah,
this, and this for my deliberate
yeah,
acts of teaching. And I can group as much as possible. I can fit that into our learning outcome for the whole class this way, and then it's slot you in. And
yeah,
so they're still working with everybody. They've still got their social interaction there, but it's always, like you're saying, as much as possible with their peers, with their class. And then we have the times where they don't have a therapist available. But I was thinking of those pull-out intensive sessions can be conferencing time with the teacher working
yeah,
on a particular thing, or a teacher aide can be told, this is what we're working on. And I was
yeah.
thinking with the communication matrix as well, going back to Lisa's question, once you've got that structure, then everybody can come on board with that, and everybody knows what you're working off, because that's one of the problems she was having, that consistency was all over the place. But if you've got a little framework, if you've got a little rubric, everybody knows we're working on this.
Yeah, one of my colleagues said that when she was working integrated within classrooms, they would actually have, in one example, she had a special board that was her board, which was a lovely big board on the side somewhere. And that's where she would write the stuff that they were focusing on for that week. So, and then what they did was they actually had the students' names and, the goal at the top. This is what we're pushing this week, all the students' names, and then the teachers, when they had, or the teacher aides or learning assistants, when they had done that, or a task or something that covered that skill, they made a note on the board.
Yeah.
So then during the week, they could see, which students got plenty of experience, plenty of opportunities, because it is all about the opportunities during the week.
Absolutely.
Which ones got the opportunities and which ones missed out. There's always those students in our classrooms that we just don't get around to. And I know when we were working together and I was in, the classrooms with you guys, it was like there's always those students that are front and center, and then it's like there's all these other ones that just hide in the corner. But yeah, so that's what they did.
Yeah, so it's not an extra, it's just incorporated into your day. And it's right there. Yeah.
And it's right there, and make a note straight away.
Brilliant. I think we've addressed that one there. And there's two more questions regarding autistic students. I have two students as RTLB referrals, and both have a diagnosis of autism. One is 6-year-old, year 2 from the Philippines. So autism and ELL.
Yep.
Who arrived in New Zealand last year, and he's hyperlexic and Gestalt language processor.
Ooh.
So a bit of echolalia going on. The other one is an 8-year-old Samoan boy who moved to New Zealand when he was 4. He has very little phonological awareness. Oh, she wanted to do a specific webinar on autism, but you're not in my budget range, unfortunately. And we can develop resources, but she basically is saying, how do we help them and their teachers? That's two things going on there. So we face stuff like this all the time as outreach teachers in RTLB. It's just constantly like, right, where are we going? We've got this coming at us. What are we doing? But it depends on the classes, doesn't it? Really, and the personalities of the people and the teachers. But go ahead.
So it would be great if the teacher was also Philippines. That would be handy.
So Filipino and Samoan language resources.
Okay, let's just say a little 6-year-old. So Gestalt language processing obviously is a really interesting one, and an area that I'm so pleased to see is being recognized more, because
isn't it awesome?
Even 20 years ago, we knew echolalia, again, behavior, communication. Behavior is communication.
Totally. I love it.
Yep. So Gestalt language processes are really fascinating because they're not developing language in your typical building block way. They're learning it in chunks and clunks, chunks of information, and how to put their chunks together to make novel and new messages. The reading I've done recently is they will end up in the same place as our natural language learners, but they will take a different path.
Right.
So again, it's coming in at the same level as them. The language that they're producing is, and that's what you feed back to them, and you support them with that. The other thing too was interesting was that the gestalts that they learn from other people are probably very you can take at face value as meaning what it probably means.
Yeah.
The ones that have come from TV or YouTube will probably require a bit of detective work to work out how they're using it in each scenario. So
I love this. It just fascinates me because it's like a mystery, isn't it?
yeah.
I had humming from Encanto. That's basically when the older sister is getting completely stressed. So she was literally using it as, no, okay, that's too much for me now. It's drip, 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 and I never stop. I thought, wow, she's actually saying it. It took me ages to, I think I've heard that somewhere. And then I finally put it together, and she was literally saying, enough now. That's enough for me. So once you
warning music.
Yeah, it is. It was the warning music.
I reckon.
Yeah. So again, it's that same one of getting to know somebody and just going that plus one, and meeting you where you are.
What frustrates me a lot is it comes down to how much the teachers understand about different difficulties.
And the progressions. Yeah, it's like what to expect with this and the progressions.
Yeah, especially with, I mean, you've got not just autism, but you've got the complexity of hyperlexic and gestalt language process. And my query around that is the hyperlexia part of the gestalts.
Yes.
And are they appearing to be hyperlexic, or is it a separate thing? Gestalt language processing is not something to fix. It's something that you work with. So
stage of language development. It
is, yeah. So it is that kind of understanding that, okay, this person is learning language in a gestalt way with those chunks.
Yeah.
And that will come out in a lot of the stuff that they do and say, and their writing will be the same, and so your literacy and everything.
So sentence stems would be a really valid way for that child to start learning.
Yeah.
So sentence stems, and with hyperlexia, with my hyperlexic students, I'm like, okay, because you've got hyperlexia and then you've got dyslexia on the other side. So basically hyperlexia, the skill there is comprehension. So you're doing simple comprehension tasks with them.
Yeah.
So
and I think often you need to come back quite a bit, quite a few stages.
Way back. Yeah.
Way back. And if you got
point to the green thing. Yeah.
And the gestalts as well means that you might have to feed in more chunks of language than you otherwise would. But I think a lot of it is just understanding, because I think the risk is with some of our students is that people assume they're a lot further above their level than what they actually are. So like you say, with that, considering that comprehension, and certainly one of the boys I've just worked with in the last year, the teacher did that. She came right back down to a lower level, and man, is he flourishing. He's just taken off, and he's come along in leaps and bounds. Whereas last year, the teacher had him doing levels that were far too hard. And when you broke it down, he wasn't understanding, he wasn't comprehending.
So I think as well, with the, here's my grad dip Tessol playing coming into play. I've got one of those. So just had to say it. I try to say it every day. We'll just use L1 as much as possible. We've got to actually decide whether the first language is actually really secure first.
Absolutely.
And so whichever language you are most secure in, or that child has the most fund of knowledge in, we make that as secure as possible. But so we feed in those language resources, those second language resources. So I'd be using the language resources from home, getting mums and dads involved, working on the comprehension and the sentence stems. I know on Teachers Pay Teachers, there's some really good sentence and answers, like, what color are your eyes? And then it's got a sentence stem down the bottom saying, my eyes are, and then you've got all the visual supports. So visual supports as well.
Yeah.
My eyes are this. So making speaking and reading those sorts of things, that if
Mm,
he is hyperlexic, he's able to read it back to you, and then
yeah,
he's putting the language in from the visuals.
yeah. And the tricky thing is knowing with the Gestalts, how much he can break that down.
Yes.
So what level he's at. So there's 4 stages of Gestalt language
Love
processing,
the
and
stages.
depending on which stage he's at, he might come out with, some phrase about the pigeon's eyes are blue, and that's his answer of blue. But he's responding in a whole chunk. And
Right.
Mr. 8-year-old, our little Samoan with phonological awareness
Yes.
difficulty. So I would expect the structured literacy approach,
Would help, shouldn't it?
but then he's 8, so he's kind of missed his first 2 years
Yes.
on that. But our phonological awareness stuff is our rhyming, our wordplay, our just awareness of sounds and
Mm.
how we represent those with letters. I find it's usually that practice and that experience of playing around with sound. So it may just be that he needs to go back and review a lot of those. But I imagine there'll be other kids in the class who need that too. So
Yeah.
again,
Don't be afraid to go
finding the
back.
kids in the class who are having the
Yeah.
same difficulty. So yeah, so it's not, it doesn't need to be English based. It could be in their home language if you've got the support to do that.
Yeah.
Always makes it really fun, especially at a classroom level, because you're increasing awareness of everyone's language and their
And
culture.
it could even be somebody in the classroom that also speaks Samoan, but we don't want to overburden that particular child to do the teaching.
No, but you can, there'll be differences between English and Samoan, same as there is with Maori and Chinese and
Yeah.
all the other languages. From a linguistic point of view, what are the sounds? Can they think of sounds that they have in their language that we don't have, or
Mm.
sounds vice versa? That
Yeah.
helps just to engage them and get them, help that awareness of the sound system.
Yes.
Um, but also wanting to check too whether there's any speech sound difficulties going on. Sometimes that's underlying it.
So basically, have we answered her question? It's like get to know exactly where he is. And again, I think the theme that's coming out across this whole talk is know where they are and then +1 as sensitively
Mm,
as you can. And
yeah.
that's that as much as we can do. It takes a little search to find out that's good. I can use that.
Yes. Yeah.
We shall not speak about the ministry supplying of therapists and specialists. We're not going there.
And I think there's a lot more push now for um, the therapies to actually provide stuff that can be picked up by teaching staff and they can run with it themselves,
Yeah.
rather than us making ourselves so important that you can't live without us. It's about us trying to put stuff in place for you teachers to make sure that you can actually work on some of the stuff yourself. So using the welcome, using communication matrix, you can do that. You do not need a speech therapist to do that. And you can pinpoint the kids that are struggling, and then you know when to get a speech therapist involved. And you can say to the speech therapist, look, they're 2 levels behind based on the welcome.
Yeah. And we'll be
Um,
speaking the same language interprofessionally. So
yeah.
I think we've fixed the world. That +1, extend, don't be afraid to go back, group. So
Mm.
those are the key messages I'm getting.
I think you will know more than many how important it is for that ongoing learning and PD and
Yeah,
learning from each other, but also, learning from other people who have different knowledge and being able to create that community of learners.
yeah, a community of practice and community of learners, absolutely.
Mm,
Yeah, I was going to say to you as well that I think we need to kind of emphasize to our teachers, on top of everything else, go off and do a course as well. Off you go. As much as we can, take the professional development opportunities that we're given if we can. I mean, a lot of my postgrads, we're under you can apply for scholarships and just get them for free through the ministry. So they are
right.
available. Yeah, some of them are. So
And they've put more training in place for teacher aides and learning assistants as well for them,
yes, yeah.
which is good. So there's a
Grab
lot of
it and
courses.
grab it if you can.
We don't know what we don't know until we.
I know, and overwhelm is a very real thing. we
And
just want to meet these children's needs and make sure they're successful. It's just like sometimes it's like, how do I start? And sometimes it is just actually having a good old Google.
yeah,
And, oh, okay, there it is. And
yep. And then getting stuck in and giving something a go.
we solve some problems. And I hope we've answered the questions of some of those people who asked those questions. If not, we're going to keep going and learning in Room B anyway. Thank you so much,
Definitely.
Joss. It's just been
Oh, you're
amazing.
very welcome.
I don't know if I'm going to edit it at all. Just go bang,
Throw it all at them.
throw it all at them all at once.
This is us on a plate.
Yeah, thanks heaps. Huge. Sorry.
Yeah, just
Such a good interviewer. Yeah.
Because this is still huge.